just advance. So as Kim said, this is my second or perhaps my third lecture ultimately here in Holladay. The first two times I kind of gave an overview of Holladay's estates. And I started with the rustic period and then moved on to the suburban country house and the California influence. I'm going to jettison any reference to the rustic, the sort of founding period of the life of Holladay's estates, just to get to the three houses I'm going to highlight, which all fall into the second and third category. All right. So just to know, there's a history that we're not going to get to. Can you move on to the next slide? So in order to organize all the information I gathered on the walk to the Bamberger and the Dreyfous houses, I decided to put them into a type of formula. I'm going to talk about a little bit about the biography of the families. I'm going to, of course, talk about the architectural houses, the gardens where relevant, and then the social events I'm going to also highlight. And the reason why I'm going to do this, if you want to move to the next slide, is because of the type of houses I'm going to be talking about. Now, we advertised that this was going to be a lecture about estates. All right, but as an estate, especially in modern legal parlance, could be a number of things. It could be a big house with a vast acreage around it. It could even be if someone dies with, I don't know, frozen chicken breast and a broken key, that could also be an estate. What I really want to do is sort of narrow down this language and define more specifically the type of houses that I'll highlight, but also that were developed here in Holladay. And these houses are villas. And villas, when you think of villas, you think of, I don't know, Italy and Tuscany, and there's a reason for that. I'm going to touch on that. The reason I'm going to call them villas for tonight's purposes is largely due to the scholarship of this architectural historian, James Ackerman, who taught at Harvard, and is one of the architectural historians to focus a lot of his work on this concept of villa. And he defined a villa, starting with ownership there at the bottom, as a property that has been developed with people of wealth. But they have not acquired their wealth from farming or any other countryside pursuit. This wealth is directly connected to urban life, to city life and city pursuits, whether it be banking or industry. So these are not farmers we're talking about. Sometimes the people behind villas are the titans of the city that buy property in the country. The third thing that makes a villa different from a farm or estate or any other sort of general type of property is that its purpose is primarily for pleasure. All right? These are places to relax, to entertain, to engage oftentimes with people from the city who come out to the country and visit you. These are worlds that you create for your own purposes. And oftentimes when you do enter these properties, you do feel like you've entered into a different world, a world created by the family that is behind the property. All right, they're largely man-made. While you feel like you're in the country, you're really in a highly controlled man-made setting. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. If you go ahead and the first villas, it's actually an ancient tradition. They appear in ancient Rome. This is the beautiful. Does anyone recognize this? This is Getty. And the Getty in Malibu, many people don't know, is a pretty close copy, as close as they could make it, to a villa that was owned by Julius Caesar's father-in-law in Pompeii. It's called the Villa of the Papyri in Herculaneum, close to Pompeii. If you advance, what happens to this tradition when you get to the Middle Ages? All right. In Rome, you had a landscape that was secure enough that you could have villas, right? In the Middle Ages, things change. What architectural form testifies to your strength? This is a world controlled largely by armies, right? By battles. So the villa disappears and the castle takes its place. If you build something out in the country in the Middle Ages, it's either a church or a castle, for the most part. You go ahead to the next slide. Villas appear in and around Tuscany during the Renaissance. And why is this? Why in this particular place? A little bit of history. When you go to Tuscany, when you go to Florence, and this is a picture of the Palazzo Pubblico in Florence, you go to see the David, right? Or you go to see Giotto's Gates of Paradise, or any other numbers of works of art. What you're really seeing, though, is the product of a burgeoning system called capitalism. Capitalism is invented here. These people invented modern accounting. Who pays for the David? It's the bankers and the merchants. Who pays for the Gates of Paradise? It's all of these burgeoning capitalists that appear in and around Florence. And not surprisingly, as they commission the David, they're also commissioning villas in and around Tuscany and in and around Florence in particular. The Medici, if you go to the next slide, had about 26 villas just for their own family. And again, this is one of my favorite, Poggio a Caiano, a beautiful villa just outside of Florence. You enter these places, and these are places to entertain. This is places, when I say the Medici, all of you know what I'm talking about. These are the primary banking family of Florence. And they get so rich, what do? They overthrow the government and become the government in the next couple of 100 years, right? So of course they have villas because this is part of their image. This is part of their presentation. And they bring people to beautiful villas like Poggio a Caiano, and they surround them with great food, great entertainment, great art. If you want to advance to the next slide. Here is a fresco that I really love because it's so absolutely gorgeous. It just epitomizes Florentine art, right? This is a fresco by the artist Pontormo, which is in one of the barrel vaults of Poggio a Caiano. And what it shows is a mythology of Greek Roman gods who are enacting through the scene here. Well, really, it's a story of seduction. All right. We don't have to go into details. It's a story of seduction. When you look at those, though, those figures, those aren't gods. Those are peasants, right? I think what the Medici are doing is they're telling you that the gods on the paintings are not the gods you should focus on during your visit. The real gods are the Medici themselves. And this is the world they're created. And they have bent all of nature and all of society to create this beautiful landscape, this beautiful place, which they are now, as their guest, inviting you to participate in. All right, so this is a tradition that is established in the modern age in Italy, and then as modernity travels up the continent to France and to England, this tradition is adopted in those places, and then eventually, especially in the Gilded Age, comes over into America, is adopted by us. All right, and ultimately, in one form or another, trickles out even to Holladay. And that's why I think Holladay is so important, is because it has these places, it has these landscapes. We're going to be talking about places where tea parties were held, croquet games, even horse races. All of this is not frivolous pursuit. This is not just having a good time to have a good time. Business deals are being made during these croquet games. Relationships are being built that will extend far beyond, the impacts will extend far beyond the walls of these villas to shape all of Utah. Right? These are places for business, just like people will join the country club, maybe because they enjoy golf, but also because the country club is a great place to do business and form those relationships with partners that will help to build the industrial landscape of the state. These are private country clubs. You can see them in that way if you want to reframe it in that sort of modern sense. First month. So what I'm saying is, while we talk about these places as places of beauty and gardens and great architecture, know that there's an agenda behind all of it. It's a very serious agenda, and it's really an agenda about building Utah. All right? Can we just talk about why Holladay? if I was teaching a class, I'd have everyone raise their hands and offer why they think Holladay happened, that this all happened in Holladay, rather than Taylorsville or Murray or 1,000 other places it could happen. I'm going to answer the question for you, though. When you look at the map of Salt Lake Valley, you can even see it in this modern Google map. There is a corner of the valley that is just greener than everywhere else. Do you all see the green smear? And you see that green smear forms. You follow the water down from Big Hollow Canyon. It kind of goes around that curve. You see that curve? And splays out into Holladay. And that's kind of the easiest answer as to why Holladay happens, and it all happens in Holladay and not in some other place. So you have water, and even after 150 years of development, you have more trees. It's just a pleasant place to be, right? In a way that a lot of the other valley, which is kind of a sage green, just isn't, all right? So you have natural resources working for this corner of the valley in a way you just don't have in any other corner. Next slide. So let's actually talk about the houses. And I'm just occasionally coming back here to watch the time. So the first house I'd like to talk about is the Walker House. I want to talk about the Walker House first because the Walkers were here first, really before anyone else. If you go to the next slide. You have the four Walker brothers, and I really wish I could go into these people's history. That just so much tragedy, and yet so much triumph. These people endured so much. In fact, there's a great book I'd encourage all of you Holladay residents to read called Merchants and Miners of Utah. Please read that because that really kind of delves into the details of these four brothers and their lives. They really come out to Holladay in large part. I believe it's David Fred who locates Holladay before anyone else does and sees that as a good place to have a farm. And they raise food here even to keep the family alive for the first couple of years they're here in the valley. And eventually, because there's so much water here, they dig a lot of ponds and lakes, and then they call it the fish farm. And so if you, well, I guess now after I'm in control, here's some beautiful views. This is old Holladay, really old Holladay. This is the fish farm of the Walkers. And it has beautiful winding pathways and lakes and things like that. Would have been a wonderful place to be. All right, 700 acres. One account told me. I mean, how big is Holladay City? I mean, it's maybe a little bit more than this, but I mean, it's a good chunk of Holladay, right? Here's the family house. This is called Glenwood. This was added on to a number of times. It was demolished, I think, in about 2020, so here recently. So this is Glenwood. This is the family gathered. When the four brothers go the way of all things, they, of course, leave this huge estate to their children. And there are several houses built, but I'm only going to focus on the houses built by Rob or Joseph, particularly GR or George Raymond Walker. I oftentimes went as Ray and Mary Cheeseman. I have to celebrate a minor victory. I looked and looked and looked for Mary Cheeseman's photo, and I happened to find a little photo of her. So there's Mary. Anyway, George and Mary, they were, I think there were about 5 other children, but George and Mary, they really stuck around. So George became a good friend of mine as I researched his house over 4 years. What do I say about George? George grew up in luxury. His family was no longer striving, we should say, when he was born. They lived in one of these 4 beautiful mansions on Main Street, Salt Lake, which stood where the Hotel New House. Is that right? Hotel New House? Yeah. The Hotel New House stood. Now it's a huge parking lot. They tore down the Hotel New House, and it's been a parking lot since the early 80s. George, like many young men in his group, attended schools back east. I think he attended Phillips Academy in Andover. He had a lot of privileged opportunities. As my grandmother might say, though, reading between the lines, I don't think he applied himself in every situation. He actually entered and got accepted to the Colorado School of Mines, which would have been a great thing for him to attend because the Walkers owned a lot of mines. He didn't. What he did instead is he ran sleigh riding trips out to the fish farm, which seemed to be a particular, anytime his name appears when he's a young man, he's running a group of young people out to the fish farm. So he really loves this place. While George is growing up, a couple of things are happening. I guess you're going to, that's the slide. Country life is becoming a thing, becoming a super fashionable thing. I don't know. What's a fashionable thing today? Taylor Swift. Country life was the Taylor Swift of its era. In fact, this is when a magazine is actually produced in England, Country Life, which we as Americanists, we copycats as we are, and were particularly back then, made our own. And everyone was reading Country Life. That magazine has now morphed into Town and Country magazine here, so it has this long tradition. So the benefits of Country Life were being put out for mass consumption. It was being advertised and heavily promoted. At the same time, what else was happening? At this around 1905 period, what was making country life possible really for the masses, or burgeoning masses? Automobiles. And boy, did George love automobiles. He collected so many automobiles. In fact, this is an advertisement of this. Has anyone heard of our company, Hope Toledo? I've never heard of it. It's one of those, I guess, flash in the pan car companies. He bought a Pope Toledo that was advertised in this wonderful magazine for society people in Salt Lake. And every time he bought a new car, they'd advertise it. So George was one of the early car collectors in the valley. So you can imagine what he was doing, driving back and forth from city to country in this Pope Toledo and various other cars. There's actually a Country Life magazine clipping that is advertising cars for country people. So it's not just for city people anymore, it's for country people. George finally settles down. He marries a woman named Lydia. And they set up house in the place to set up house for a young married couple in Salt Lake City at that time. Do all of you recognize this building? This is one of the great buildings of Salt Lake City that we have lost. And the copy that now stands in its place is no substitute for the original. This is the Emery Homes Apartments, built by Utah Silver Queen, whose name is so long I'm not even going to attempt to say it. Now it's called more commonly the Eagle Gate Apartments. And this was, of course, built by the Silver Queen and her architect, J.C. Childs. Was it C.J.? No, it's J.C. Childs. And J.C. Childs is known for building the Grand Hotel downtown and the Mining and Stock Exchange. These are the buildings he wants to spend his time designing. But there is one really great article talks about, is Salt Lake City growing or is it not? And they interviewed J.C. Childs, and he says, no, it's not growing. Proof of it is I have to spend all my time designing stupid country houses. I want to be designing important public buildings or prominent buildings on Main Street, but instead I have to design country houses. So Ray Walker is living in this. J.C. Childs is actually setting up shop. His architectural firm is in the Walker building. So, of course, it's natural fit that Ray Walker hires J.C. Childs to design his own country house. Let's see. There we go. So there it is. It's a nice house, and I like it. All of you like it. Certainly one of Holladay's best, especially from this time. Is it cutting edge? No. Is it the latest and greatest? I don't think the architect knew the latest and greatest. The latest and greatest would be something like this. This is a house designed just a few years before J.C. Childs in a new fashion called the Edwardian fashion. All of this is happening during the King Edward's reign, and so the period gets the name Edwardian, right? This is Lutyens. This is the guy, if you can hire him to design a country house, this is who you go for. And you look at this and you get a sense of tradition, but also a little bit of modernity mixed in. Do all of you see that? Right? With the blank walls. I love these high set windows. I mean, what's happening all the space below it? I don't know. It's a great house. Anyway, so this is not bad, but it's good. It's a good, solid house. But I don't think in the long run, even George or Ray was satisfied. Because in a few years after this is designed and constructed, Ray needs a new architect to design a garden for him. And he does not use this architect. He does not use J.C. Craig. He uses another architect. Oh, and I do have to draw attention to these beautiful blueprints of the house, which still, I mean, even a bad house was still beautifully designed in this period. All of it was designed by hand. Not even a Texas Instruments calculator for decades, right? I mean, every single angle, every just mind blowing. So even mediocre houses are still masterpieces in my estimation. Hopefully yours as well. He goes, oh, and here's the inside. Everyone likes to see the inside of these houses. I brought in pictures of what the house looked like before its renovation in 2009 or 10. A lot of you know it went under renovation. This house these are photos from a Better Homes and Gardens spread that was done on this house. But the original, which is much simpler, is more kind of the finishes and the level of detailing you would have seen in George's time, right? Anyway, now we see the inside. Move on. Oh yeah, the staircases. Yeah, these photos turned out darker than I thought. Anyway, the house is fine. The house is fine. The true masterpiece is the garden, and I love this garden because it is one of the best expressions of arts and crafts, certainly landscape design, but I would say arts and crafts mentality in the state. This is designed by a really, I think, interesting architect named Alberto Treganza. And Alberto Treganza really brings a lot of style and texture and interest to architecture. When he comes here from California, he designs actually a number of other buildings in Holladay, let alone the state. And this garden is centered around a pool, as you can see, that has the most interesting edging I have ever seen. What Treganza does is design this edging with deep flower boxes that he intends nasturtiums to be planted into. All of you know what nasturtiums are. They're long trailing plants. So they would float in the water. You would have the source of the pool be this fountain right here, which would tumble out of this pergola-like structure, which is hiding the bathhouse. This is the changing room behind it. It would tumble in here. Here were steps that led you into the pool, and then you would be surrounded by all these floating flowers as you swam in this pool. I mean, totally impractical. I mean, to keep this thing clean would have been a nightmare. But it is so incredibly incredible. Do you agree? Do you think this is the best pool you've ever seen? Just nod your head to say yes. And then this pergola. So here we have the sand pile, which again, probably not a good idea to put that by the pool, but they did. They have this pergola, and then this other fountain, which echoes the fountain that feeds the pool with lily pads in it. I mean, it's just I will point out, for the sake of a later slide, I'm going to show you that this is not a modern pool deck. I want you to register that. I'll get back to that. All right. You would not build a pool like this today, but are we glad that once upon a time we did? Here's the pergola. I mean, just fortunately the pergola survives. Do any of you recognize this type of pergola? I brought this up in the last time I presented. This is the same pergola that fronts Wasatch Lawn Cemetery. And it's because it's the same architect, same designer. He tries out the pergola here, and then he goes, oh, I like that. And he uses the same idea along Wasatch Lawn. I love that. And I mean, he's designing chairs. He's designing every angle by hand, out of his own mind. I mean, this guy is all right. So, I do have to jump down a rabbit hole. I'm going to try to get down. I know I'm running late on time, but I do have this friendship that Alberto Draganza and Ray Walker put out forge as they build their garden together leads on to other projects. One is they established a bird sanctuary in the 700 acres that is the Walker Farm. So if you have birds around in Holladay, they're probably descendants of birds that were saved. Those birds, here we go. They work, I should add that when he's not designing architecture, Alberto Draganza is a big ornithologist. He loves birds. They write magazine articles together. Here's one from the Condor. I don't know if you can see, but I don't know, they're writing on some pigeon or something together. And they also work together on making Mark the George Walker's flash in the pan, but still their political career. I think after George Walker has his dream house, he has his little girl, he has his wife, everything's going great. He decides, well, I got to do something else. So he runs for county commissioner. And not surprisingly, his platform is a popular platform at this time called the Good Roads Movement. What do you think the Good Roads Movement is all about? Making roads more passable for people who own automobiles like himself. And part of this Good Roads Movement effort that George engages in is working on the bridges of Salt Lake County. He decides the bridges of Salt Lake County are really ugly, and he's going to fix that. So he starts a campaign, asks all the architects in the valley to submit images of pretty bridges that he and his fellow commissioners will judge and then award ribbons and commissions to the winner. Well, what architect do you suppose won the competition? Alberto Draganza. And they commissioned two bridges, one of which I've been able to trace. And do any of you have an idea of what bridge this is? Yep, the Cottonbottom Bridge. People, this is a Holladay masterpiece. I want you to appreciate just how beautiful this bridge is. I don't think after they spent, the wad on this bridge, they really commissioned many others, if any other. But this bridge is a masterpiece. I like to think that that's George. This picture was taken about 1950. I like to think that's George in this automobile passing across the bridge that this notable architect designed, which of course was his own architect. And here's some images. I don't want to encourage people to stop and admire this bridge, but at some point in your life, you got to stop and look at the bridge side that faces the river, away from the road. It is absolutely stunning. And the fact that it's held up with, I think, very little maintenance is amazing. It testifies to the craftsmanship that went into building this bridge. Unfortunately, as you know, the other half of the bridge, this was a two-sided bridge, was taken out by road expansion. But the underpinnings of this bridge are still there. One other point I want to make is that this bridge is made out of cobbles. And this was the material that emphasized the fact that you were in the country, and not just any part of the country, but cottonwood. This was the material at this period of time that lent cottonwood Holladay its identity. I would love to see you guys embrace that material again, in part because cobbles are everywhere. I grew up in Holladay, so I know what happens anytime you dig a hole bigger than an inch. You're hitting rocks, right?
Yeah.
You literally have this material in your backyard, in your front yard, and your side yard too. I love seeing cobbles used, and anytime you see cobbles used, and these are some examples of how people use cobbles in Holladay. This is the judge estate. It used to be just beyond the cotton bottom. It was actually called, I think, the Cobbles. Cobble Crest, which was a dance hall that was made of cobbles on that same road. And then examples of old cobbles. They're the gates of the convent in Tuscany. And new cobbles. I love the fact that the Holladay village used cobbles on its siding. Don't take that for granted. That's your identity. That's your material. That says that you're a Holladay. Anyway, enough of cobbles. Let's go on to the Bambergers. And I do have to check the time because I do run over.
Don't worry about it.
All right, I'm gonna speed through this. Okay, the Bambergers. Another great family who live in a house called Miramonte. Miramonte means basically see the mountains, right? Anyone who can translate Spanish other than I can maybe has a better, yeah. Look at the mountains, you know, Mira is to see the mountains. So here's Miramonte. Let's talk a little bit about Miramonte. I thought that this was the first incarnation of Miramonte, but I'm not quite sure that's the case, because in this Salt Lake Telegram article of April the 2nd, 1916, they talk about the Farnsworth, Mr. and Mrs. Farnsworth will open Miramonte for short stays only, as they will spend a great deal of time in the city in the coming months. This is a wonderful article that sort of details everyone out in Holladay with country houses in 1916. It's kind of a who's who and where they're staying and all of that. And I looked at Farnsworth. This was a name I wasn't familiar with. Turns out he's from Provo. I love it. This article says this is a local boy who made good. He's born in Provo, and I think fairly impoverished circumstances, but by the time he dies, he is the vice president of, no surprise, Walker Bank. So he's hanging out with his friends, the Walkers, in their own Miramonte. And I did a research on the estate, which is described as a bungalow, and I think that's it, behind the trees. And obviously that's not a really good picture, but get a sense that there's a house there with hip roof and of course a lovely lake. Everyone wants to be near the water, right? Because that's what you come to Holladay for. And here's a picture of the inside. These wonderful screen porches, which of course is not a tradition we maintain anymore, but they did back then. They loved their screen porches. I think what happens is the Farnsworths, because I couldn't find I did a title search on this property. I couldn't find any suggestion that this property was transferred from the Farnsworths to the Bambergers. I think they're renting, the Farnsworths are renting or borrowing this property while they are there. But in 1930, the Bambergers move in and they buy this property according to deed of transfer title in Salt Lake County. They buy this directly from a Walker, and they set up shop. When I talk about the Bambergers, a lot of people think I'm talking about Simon Bamberger and his family, and of course they are part of the same family. But the ones who settle here in Holladay Cottonwood are descending from the brother of Simon Bamberger, who migrate to Utah about the same time. They migrate to the United States and then ultimately to Utah. And these families both make good in their own respective spheres. Simon, particularly in politics, and Jacob and Bertha and their sons, Clarence, and, well, descendants, are really invested in money. All right. And they start building their house, and they build it in Spanish revival style. And what I love about this property is it's very processional. You have to enter through a very large gatehouse, which sadly no longer exists. And then you reach the house, which has been modernized. This is the house as it existed originally. And that's the house as it's being modernized in the early 80s. These are old tax codes. I'm going to talk a little bit about the architecture and the architect, and then we can talk more about the family itself. One thing I want to point out at the beginning of this discussion is that when America talked about manifest destiny and go west, young man, et cetera, they never really did mean Utah. Where is the destination? This is, by the way, a painting in the Senate staircase in the United States Capitol. Westward, the course of empire takes its way. Emanuel Leutz, one of the great German-American artists of this time. The painting tells you where people are to go when westward the empire takes its way. These people are on a peak. They're looking down into the promised land. What is depicted below is that promised land. This is the Golden Gate. This is San Francisco. Utah, throughout even the mid-20th century, especially if you have a certain economic ability, is a place to make money. But it's not a place to end up. It's not a place to spend it. All right? You go to California to spend that money. Oh, I had to bring this in. This is a really funny article from one of the first editions ever published of the Desert News in 1867. You can tell that poor George Q. Cannon, who was writing this article, is really trying hard to keep people from migrating out of Utah to California. He's saying, Californians, they made it rich in '49 on the gold rush, and now they're dissipated and they spend all their money. But we Utahns, we stayed here and we toughed it out. And now we're well-to-do, and we have gumption, we have sinew, not like those namby bambies. So there's always this competition between Utah and California. People even back then in the 1860s understood what a temptation California was. So at the same time, George Bamberger, Clarence Bamberger is shopping around for architects to build. California is becoming more itself. It's coming into its own. It's discovering its identity. It's discovering it's discovering its movie industry, right? Burgeoning movie industry. A lot of these movies focused on the glorified, imagined Spanish past, including this image, which now hangs in the Utah Museum of Fine Arts of Rudolph Valentino as Caballero Gerrazano. This was a role that made him famous. The reason why this painting is at the Utah Museum of Fine Arts is because Rudolph Valentino, of course, marries a Utah, a woman named Winifred Hudnut that poses and remakes herself as Natasha Rambavonia. Anyway, she goes Russian. So we have movies, we have wealthy people. This is a beautiful painting, actually, which is now at BYU Museum of Art. That is here for on a special exhibition, highlighting the collection of the Hispanic Society. This is Archer Huntington, whose parents, or at least adopted father and mother, established the Huntington Gardens, right? And he establishes a whole Spanish museum in New York City. And at the same time, we have William Randolph Hearst, and he's building Sun City. You get this trend, right? Architecturally speaking, a lot of this is being generated, interest in Spain and California and the merging of these identities by 1915 exhibition, which takes place in San Diego, which leads to the development of Balboa Park, which is still there. You know, this over-the-top Spanish architecture. But further north, we have this guy in Montecito. A lot of you, some of you probably have visited Montecito in Santa Barbara. You know, in that community, by law, you have to build in the style. You have to have red tile roofs and wide plaster walls, and that is because of the influence of this mega architect. His name is George Washington Smith. And he builds a house, his own house in Santa Barbara, which he calls Casa Draciona. And it's modeled on houses that he sees while on vacation in Spain in Andalusia, in southern Spain, close to Granada. Towns like this. And what I think is so amazing, what I didn't realize until I had started researching this presentation, is that when Clarence Bamberger is shopping around for an architect, who does he hire? He hires George Washington Smith. Now this is really important to me, because George Washington Smith, in my world, is a true god. He's amazing. All right, I had no idea that there was a house designed by George Washington Smith in Utah, let alone in the city I grew up in. But that's the case. This is one exception where, rather than Utahns going to California to spend their money, a Utah brings California here. And that's what we get with El Miramonte. This is some slides up for. So here we have El Miramonte, George Washington Smith. This is the gateway, which is so cool to enter a house like this. And then the house itself. And I think I have a picture of what it looks like today. And I will say, the impression you have of the Bamberger house today is a normal suburban house, actually, is how I read it. What they did in the 1970s is take away a lot of, I'm trying to get a pointer here. What they did, can all of you see how awkward this is? How it looks like a house that's evolved over time, right? There's this big gap. You have this massing here, and then you have this massing here, right? And you would never design a house like that. And in fact, in the 70s, they filled this in, right? But when you know that George Washington Smith wanted his houses to give the impression as being part of these Andalusian villages, with houses angled in all sorts of ways, jumbled together in a tight medieval, type of layout, it makes sense. Do all of you see that? Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, the house is modernized, and it loses a lot of its Spanish grills, and it loses a lot of its massing. And you have to understand why this happens. Shortly after this house is built, this style goes really out of fashion. If you think of Hollywood films like Whatever Happened to Baby Jane or Sunset Boulevard, Norma Desmond lives in a heavy Italianate Spanish villa. You want to be like Norma Desmond, or you want to be like Joan Collins and who's her, you want, what you want are the houses that this type of house birthed, the ranch house. There's a direct connection between this house, this modern house, and the ranch house. But I'm really glad that we at least have this expression of Hollywood glamour. Some of the beautiful details. I love this door, which unfortunately is original. Look how this scallop shape is echoed in the shutters and in the pocket. So much fun. Here's the inside. The opening was not there. It was a flat roof, or flat ceiling, all the way across. What I want you to see in this image is how, like a modern ranch house, connected you are, even when you enter the front door, to the backyard. And a particularly modern feature of this house, I took an image like this to show you this, because George Washington Smith would oftentimes travel to Europe. He's one of those architects who traveled to Europe and would bring pieces back and install them in houses. Like, this is original. I believe this is it's like a canned limestone fireplace that probably George Washington Smith sourced in Europe and then brought here for this commission. What I love is, and what I think is most modern about this house, is the patio. Because this, again suggests that this house is now of the 20th century. If you think back to George Walker's house, that was really a 19th century house. But here's a modern house with this indoor-outdoor living and a particular emphasis on the patio as a living room that extends the house to the backyard. Remember George Walker's pool? Didn't have a patio, you couldn't accommodate a party there, or his house didn't have this outdoor living, but this one does. And this is a very modern sensibility that's being baked into the soul of this house. And of course, from this, you get the rancho. I brought in these photos to reference earlier examples like the pool, or even earlier examples of El Miramonte. You didn't have a patio in this period, you had a covered porch. But now you're living outside, which is particularly modern. That's what this house was. I love this house. Anyway, well, and I do have to talk about parties. The Bambergers threw the best parties in town. The Bambergers, as modern as their house may be, look to the past in their entertainments. One thing they like to do is have fox hunts. And there weren't foxes in Holladay. What they would do is they would dip a bit of sheep's wool or something in fox musk, throw it up a tree, and then have the hounds try to find it. While they, in high English riding dress, would pursue that bit of sponge. And this book is actually a register that shows El Miramonte as a place where you can fox hunt. Even perhaps more impressive is the horse races that they have. They have their very own horse track. And what they would do in the 30s is invite the junior league to organize this. Essentially, it's a point-to-point. And all the people, all society would come out to Conway, the governor, they would buy boxes, and you would bet on the horses. I don't know if you bet on horses, maybe you probably did. You watch horses parade around, and at the same time, you would have a dog show. And what is this attraction between purebred dogs and purebred horses? It's this, again, it's this old idea of aristocracy. The aristocracy as purebreds watching animals who are also purebreds. And this has an ancient tradition that goes back way into even medieval Europe. But I love, you have Clarence and his wife Marie, and they're sparkling whites watching their horse races in their own backyard. Last but not least, I do want to talk a little bit about the Dreyfus house. And how much time do I have? Oh, geez. Promise to be quick, although I do love this house too. Do all of you recognize this family name? I'm curious. By raise of hands, did anyone, I guess before the 1970s, anyone go downtown and shop at the Paris department store? Then you shopped at the Dreyfus store. The Dreyfuses are the Paris department store people. And they have this beautiful house called Happiness Farm here in Holladay. Here's a picture of its gardens, probably in the 50s. Let's see, can you advance the slide? Happiness Farms seem to be owned initially by this man called Leon Rains, who was, no surprise, a mining magnate who bought this property. And he even established his own coal mining town in Carbon County. It's called Rains, Utah. It certainly looks like a place that needs an HR department. Anyway, this house seemed to burn down at some point. And I couldn't find any record of the house burning down, but that's what the Dreyfuses told me, so I'm not going to question that. It was purchased by Emmanuel Dreyfus and then inherited by his son, Jules Dreyfus, and it's still in the family, I'm happy to say, like the Bamberger's house is. Emmanuel Dreyfus originated, well, actually, I'm not going to tell you where he originated. I'm going to wait until I show you the house. He comes from out of state and buys this booming store called Paris Millinery. And he's able to maintain it from 1916, when he buys the Paris Millinery, up to the 1970s, when this store and a lot of other stores are ultimately put out of business by the coming of Crossroads Mall. That's what really killed a lot of these old-fashioned department stores. So here's, wouldn't it be fun to have a place to shop like this downtown? It's so sad these places don't exist. So here we have new management cell. Here comes Emmanuel Dreyfus. If you buy a store in Salt Lake, you have to have a place to live. You can't just, live among the socks and, the underwear section. So he builds this. And I will pay $500 to whoever can tell me what style this house references. And I'm confident you can't. That's why I'm offering you $500. This is the only house like it in all of Utah. And it's just flying out of space. I was so surprised to see it. So delighted to see it. Any guesses? All right. Chip sale. This is a Creole plantation house. Because Emmanuel Dreyfus is born and raised in New Orleans. So when he comes to Utah, he builds a New Orleans house. And boy, does he quickly learn that what works in New Orleans does not work in Utah. This whole front, which you see glazed in here, you always see that with windows. It was originally a big screen porch. And I think that probably lasted a single winter. Here's the house today. And it is stunning, and it's the most intact of all the houses I've discussed. And what makes it a Creole cottage, if we go back, it's a regular, it looks like a regular sort of Greek or classical revival house. But do all of you see the porch? How deeply, it's like this big chunk that's taken out of the front of the house. Why do you think they did that in places like New Orleans? It's hot, and you want to get cool air right into the center of the house. And so that's what they do here. And I am so happy to say that even 90 years later, aside from the glazing of the front porch, which of course happened soon after the house is built, the house is still intact. And here you see examples of Creole cottages. This is, what's cool about this house form, this building form, is you can dress it down. This is, I don't know, the equivalent of an 1800 strip mall, just average, building by the road to a plantation house, right? A seat of power and a seat of authority over the land. And that's what you see here. I have to take you inside because this house is really fun. This is the, trying to be sensitive, I didn't over photograph it and walking these houses like everywhere, but I did find a lot of historic photographs. This is the front piazza that stretches the entire length of the house. And why don't we do this? I love a piazza. It's filled with plants. It's like living in a greenhouse. I happen to love plants. Here's a fountain made of cobbles. We're using the local material. Here's the dining room, and you can see how big and open it is. And there's that piazza. The dining room and living room face on that piazza, allowing the cool breezes into the very center of the house. The other side of the dining room have this enormous chimney, again made out of those wonderful cobbles. And it just dominates the whole house. So you have heat in the winter as well as the cool air in the summer. And then here's some modern photographs. This is the back hallway. Everything is just bathed in light. I love it because you feel kind of Spanish in this hallway. But then you keep going. You go to the basement. They have this amazing basement, like this German pub. And the bar, they bought this bar. They didn't take a picture of the bar because they want to be respectful. They asked me not to. Bars are pretty cool. We all have to have a party at the somehow get invited to the Dreyfuses and hang out in their bar, because their bar is purchased from a hotel that goes bankrupt in New Orleans in the 1920s. And all the wine comes with the bar. And you hang out this wine cellar, you feel like you're, I don't know, living in an Edgar Allan Poe story. It's amazing. I love it. So atmospheric. The bedroom is very French. But if I had to live in one room for the rest of my life, it would be this one. The bathroom is amazing. So you have all these different styles. This is high Art Deco. And it even would have been better than how you see it in the present day. Because when it was new, the ceiling was entirely gilded, as were all the doors. And one of the gilded doors survives. On this wall by the bathroom where you see the crane painting was also gilded. It was sort of bathed in marble gold. You would have felt so kind of posh, plush, all that. It reminds me of, I don't know, a bathroom. Has anyone visited the Claridge's in London? Claridge's is the first hotel ever went to the world. They have a classical side and they have an Art Deco side. It made me feel like I was living high in Claridge's. Anyway, go to Claridge's, go to the Dreyfus bathroom. It's great. Gardens and things like that. Really quickly about their entertainment. I did want to point this out. Not everything is rosy on Happiness Farm. One thing that happens, unfortunately, and I really respect Emmanuel Dreyfus for surviving this, is in 1928 he buys controlling shares of, remember George Walker, his family's business, which is Walker Brothers Department Store. Well, in 1929 you have the crash. By 1931, Walker Brothers has gone bankrupt, which of course leaves George without a job. He's minimally meshing with his family store, but also Emmanuel Dreyfus loses, something he's heavily invested in. Nevertheless, he's able to keep the Paris open even through the Depression and into the 70s, which is something that's, I think, no small feat. And one thing he does to keep the Paris people happy is he has each summer, and these were big parties, they were covered every single year in the newspaper. They would have all the employees, all 300 employees of Paris, out to Happiness Farm. They'd have a Southern barbecue. I love this. After guests feasted on barbecue pork and lamb, corn creole, and all the trimmings, the program ensued. And here is Emmanuel Dreyfus and then Jules Dreyfus, his son, who carries that on. Looks like a really great party. Here's the last image. I don't know what's going on here. You have some guy pouring out some sort of sand. Jules Dreyfus holding a baby, floating over grass. I don't know, but anyway, good time held by all. And I thought this would be a good image to end on, talking about all the spirits and ghosts of the past. Hopefully brought to life tonight through this lecture. Anyway, I'm happy to answer any questions. We'll call it quits there. Thank you for your time and attention. I know that was a long slog, but yeah, it's always fun to come back on Holladay. Okay. Any questions, comments? Anyone want to walk down memory lane? Share. One thing I like about the Dreyfus, one thing else I'll add, is they had a pet grizzly bear. The only family that could have that. They had all sorts of crazy animals. Any questions?
One comment. I think the Bamberger stay, they not only had the dog shows, they not only had the horse races, they had the polo dresses right there.
Yeah, they did polo shows too. Which again is part of this aristocratic. I mean, King Charles grew up playing polo. It's part of this long tradition. Yeah. Thank you. Go ahead, Kim.
Do the Dreyfus estate still have all the flower gardens and so on? Still?
Yeah, they re-landscaped it in sort of a more, I would say, modern way. The flower gardens were pretty formal, but yeah, it's still beautifully and actively maintained. So it's really a joy to be there. Go ahead. I promise not to stay. It's a holiday though. I mean, it really is easy enough to find, but I did promise that I wouldn't talk about locations.
It's not accessible.
It's not accessible, and you can't see it on the street. It's like I said at the first, you enter into this world that they have created, cultivated over 80, 90 years.
None of these is available. I mean, accessible.
No, none of these are. No, none of these houses. Any other comments or questions? I will say, even though you can't see them on a daily basis, be proud of this heritage. Things were happening in Holladay that just weren't happening in any other corner of Utah. This was really a unique space where a lot of unique things happened.
Didn't you say that a lot of the money that was made in Utah went out of Utah, like to Europe?
Yeah. The Bambergers tell a story of one cousin that they had that would only show up once a year to collect the paycheck, and then he'd go back to the south of France.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think the reason that the area developed, you know, there was no air conditioning.
Yeah, exactly.
Cooler out here, and the air was fresher.
Yeah, yeah. And that's how my own family ended up here. My grandfather was dying of kidney disease, which is the family curse. And the doctors told him in the 1950s, well, go out to Holladay, breathe fresh air, and feel better. Well, I think the yard work that he was forced to do probably put him in his grave sooner than kidney disease. But yeah, it was creeks and fresh air, and that was the health regimen. That was how you cured even kidney disease back then. Go ahead.
It wasn't big money, but Urban Nelson, the landscape architect, had little place on Pheasant Way called Singing Tree.
Yeah, and that's still there, as far as I know.
I think it's been subdivided all around.
Yeah, but the house is still there, I think. Yeah, yeah. I'm aware of that. I've been able to tour that. That's a neat house.
What's it called?
Singing Trees. Go ahead.
Does Holladay have a preservation for historical buildings?
Do they have designated historic buildings? Well, that is a question I'm going to let Kim and the Historic Commission answer. You want to answer? Or I guess it's
It's in the works.
It's in the works. That's how I'm going to answer that. It's in the works. Go ahead.
Is
Linda.
your family's, your grandfather's home still there on Holladay Boulevard?
Yes, it is. I'm happy to say. Yeah. In fact, it's in one of these paintings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right, let's go home. Thank you all.